kilometers 19 ms of the Hellespont Dardanelles and about 25 kilometers 15 ms of the traditional site of ancient Troy. The same Greek term rendered Troy is also applied to the Shroud, a region in Mysia that surrounded Troy. The city of Troas was first built during the latter part of the 4th century BCE by Antigonus, one of the generals of Alexander the Great. In 133 BCE it came under Roman control, and thereafter the region of Mysia became part of the Roman province of Asia. Julius Caesar for a time considered transferring the seat of the Roman government to Troas. Emperor Augustus further favored the city by making it a colonia, independent of the provincial governor of Asia, and by exempting its citizens from both land and poll taxes. On Paul's second journey, probably in the spring of 50 CE, and after passing through Phrygia and Galatia, the apostle and his companions came to Troas, for the Spirit of Jesus did not permit them to go into Bithynia. Acts 16. 6-8 Here in Troas, Paul had an unusual vision, one of a man calling to him, "Step over into Macedonia and help us." Immediately it was concluded, God had summoned us to declare the good news to them. The occurrence of us in this text and we in the following verses must mean that, here in Troas, Luke first joined Paul's party and made the voyage with them across the Aegean to Neapolis. Acts 16. 9-12 After leaving Ephesus on his third journey, Paul stopped in Troas and there preached the good news about the Christ, for as he says, "A door was opened to me in the Lord." But after an undisclosed period of time, the apostle became concerned that Titus had not arrived, and so he departed for Macedonia, hoping to find him there. Act 20. 1. 2 Co 2. 12, 13. Evidently Paul spent that winter in Greece before returning again to Troas in the spring of 56 CE. Act 20. 2-6 This text to acute miritra longo, Trophimus 1130 Paul's last visit to Carpus' home had been on his third journey in about 56 CE 2-4. 13. Trophimus Trophomidal. Feeding. Nourishing. A co-worker of the Apostle Paul. An Ephesian Gentile Christian. Act 21. 29 Trophimus became a Christian perhaps during Paul's extended Ephesian ministry on his third missionary journey. Afterward Trophimus was one of Paul's traveling companions. Observed. Provision is made so that anyone unclean or on a distant journey can observe it a month after Nisan 14:9. 1-14 Various regulations are given involving the duties and the privileges of priests and Levites, including the preparation of the water for cleansing and its uses. 18. 1. 19. 22 The offerings are listed that must be presented each day, each Sabbath, at the start of each month, during festivals, and during the seventh month. 28. 1. 29. 40 Jehovah's commands governing vows are recorded. 30. 1-16 Guilty ones must confess and compensate the wronged party. 5. 5-8 A procedure is established for handling cases when a wife is suspected of secret adultery. 5. 11-31 Arrangements are made for 6 cities of refuge. 35. 9-34 Israelites manifest a lack of appreciation for Jehovah's provisions, and they disobey his commands. The people complain about eating manna and long for meat. When Jehovah provides quail, many act with extreme greed and are punished with death. 11. 4-34 They believe the bad report of the 10 fearful spies and want to return to Egypt. Moses has to intercede for them. 13. 1. 14. 19 When that rebellious generation is sentenced to wander and die in the wilderness, the people attempt to enter the promised land without Jehovah's blessing, and they suffer a military defeat. 14. 26-45 There is a failure to respect Jehovah's visible representatives. Miriam and Aaron speak out against Moses. Jehovah strikes Miriam with leprosy. 12. 1-15 Korah, Dathan, Abiram, On, and 250 chieftains range themselves against Moses and Aaron. Jehovah executes the rebels, and this gives rise to further murmuring. 14,700 more die. 16. 1-50 Ado text to acute miritra longo, nurse 515 March 2. 9, 16, 17, 24, 31, and the trumpet signals for convening the assembly and for breaking camp. 10. 2-6. Also, the law concerning quarantine is worded to fit camp life. 5. 2-4 Various other commands are stated in such a way as to call for a future application when the Israelites would be residing in the Promised Land. Among these are the use of trumpets for sounding war calls 10. 9. The setting aside of 48 cities for the Levites 35. 2-8. The action to be taken against idolatry and the inhabitants of Canaan 33. 50-56. The selection of 6 cities of refuge, instructions for handling cases of persons claiming to be accidental manslayers 35. 9-33. And laws involving inheritance and marriage of heiresses 27. 8-11. 36. 5-9. Additionally, the recording of the Israelite encampments is definitely ascribed to Moses New 33. 2, and the concluding words of the Book of Numbers also point to him as the writer of the account. 36. 13. Authenticity. The authenticity of the book is established beyond any doubt. Outstanding is its candor. Wrong conduct and defeat are not concealed. New 11. 1-5, 10, 32-35. 14. 2, 11, 45 Even the transgressions of Moses himself, his brother Aaron, his sister Miriam, and his nephews Nadab and Abihu are exposed. 3. 3, 4. 12. 1-15. 20. 2-13 Repeatedly, happenings recorded in the book are recounted in the Psalms 78. 14-41. 95. 7-11. 105. 40, 41. 106. 13-33. 135. 10, 11. 136. 16-20. By their allusions to major events and other details in Numbers, Joshua 4. 12. 14. 2, Jeremiah 2:18. 4, Nehemiah 9. 19-22, David PS 95. 7-11, Isaiah 48. 21, Ezekiel 20. 13-24, Hosea 9. 10, Amos 5. 25, Micah 6. 5, the Christian martyr Stephen Acts 7. 36, the Apostles Paul 1 Co 10. 1-11 and Peter 2 PE 2. 15, 16, the disciple Jude verses 11, and the Son of God Joe 3. 14. Re 2. 14 showed that they accepted this record as part of God's inspired word. There is also Balaam's prophecy regarding the star that would step forth out of Jacob, which is its initial fulfillment when David became king and thereafter subdued the Moabites and Edomites. New 24. 15-19. 2-8. 2, 13, 14. Value. The Book of Numbers forcefully illustrates the importance of obedience to Jehovah, respect for him and his servants, the need for faith and guarding against ungodly men. New 13. 25. 14. 38. 22. 7, 8, 22. The way I am directing my blows is so as not to be striking the air. But I pummel my body and lead it as a slave, that, after I have preached to others, I myself should not become disapproved somehow. 1 Co 9. 24-27. Contestants in the Greek games were strenuously trained, and discipline was rigid. Diet and behavior were closely observed. The rules of the race were strictly enforced by the judges. If a runner came in first but had violated the rules, his running was in vain. As the apostle expressed it. Moreover, if anyone contends even in the games, he is not crowned unless he has contended according to the rules. 2T2. 5 runners directed their eyes toward the prize located at the finish line. Paul ran in this single-minded, wholehearted way. G2. 2. PHP 2. 16. 3. 14 Near the end of his life he was able to say, I have fought the fine fight, I have run the course to the finish, I have observed the faith. From this time on there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness. 2t4. 7, 8. In discussing God's dealings in connection with his choosing of those making up spiritual Israel, Paul explained that Israel according to the flesh counted on their fleshly relationship to Abraham. Row 9. 6, 7, 30-32 They thought they were the chosen ones and ran, or pursued righteousness, but in the wrong way. Trying to establish their righteousness by their own works, they did text to acute miritra longo. Rust 828 here. Issa 9. 15. See also 19. 15, where Ush appears to denote the Egyptians in general. Rust. The reddish, porous, brittle coating formed on iron especially when chemically attacked by moisture. By extension, the coating produced on any of various other metals by corrosion. Iron rusts, copper and silver are said to corrode, even gold can be attacked by certain acids or elements. The Hebrew word shul-middle.r, translated rust NW. RS or skunk is drawn from a word meaning develop an ailment 2ch16. 12. Hence with reference to metal, it denotes rust. As 24. 6, 11, 12 The Greek word brosis means an eating mount 6. 19, 20, while middle.us means both poison row 3. 13. Just 3. 8 and rust. Just 5. 3. Ezekiel compared Jerusalem to a wide-mouthed copper cooking pot, the rust of which is in it. This rust represented the uncleanness, loose conduct, and bloodshed for which Jerusalem was responsible. The command was given, after cooking flesh in the pot, to stand it empty upon its coals in order that it may get hot. And its copper must become heated up, and its uncleanness must be liquefied in the midst of it. Let its rust get consumed and its copper may burn, that its filthiness may be melted in it, its rust consumed. RS. As 24. 3-12. Jesus Christ said, in his Sermon on the Mount, Stop storing up for yourselves treasures upon the earth, where moth and rust brosis consume, and where thieves break in and steal. Rather, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Mount 6. 19, 20 Material wealth hoarded up is put to no beneficial use. Idle, it may rust and eventually be of no use even to its owner. In fact, as James warns rich men who trust in material wealth, your riches have rotted. Your gold and silver are rusted away, and their rust middle.us will be as a witness against you and will eat your fleshy parts. Something like fire is what you have stored up in the last days. Look. The wages due the workers who harvested your fields, but which are held up by you, keep crying out, and the calls for help on the part of the reapers have entered into the ears of Jehovah of armies. Just 5. 2-4 Instead of using their riches in the right way, they unrighteously hold them back. The longer this is done, and the greater the corrosion and rust gathered, the greater the witness is against them before the judgment throne of God. The opposite of such failure to use material wealth was recommended by Jesus when he said, Make friends for yourselves by means of the unrighteous riches, so that, when such fail, they may receive you into the everlasting dwelling places. Luke 16. 9. Ruth. A Moabitess who married Mahlon after the death of his father Elimelech, and while Mahlon, his mother Naomi, and his brother Chilion were living in Moab. A famine had caused the family to leave their native Bethlehem in Judah. Ruth's brother-in-law Chilion was married to the Moabitess Orpah. Eventually the two brothers died, leaving behind childless widows. Learning that Jehovah's favor was again manifest in Israel, Naomi, accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, proceeded to return to Judah. Ru 1. 1-7. 4. 9, 10. Her loyal love. Whereas Orpah finally returned to her people at Naomi's recommendation, Ruth stuck with her mother-in-law. Deep love for Naomi and a sincere desire to serve Jehovah in association with his people enabled Ruth to leave her parents in her native land, with little prospect of finding the security that marriage might bring. Ru 1. 8-17. 2. Minded in all things, to suffer evil, do the work of an evangelizer, fully accomplish his ministry. 2t4. 3-5 In keeping his senses, Timothy was to realize that Paul would not be on the scene much longer. 2t4. 6-8 And Timothy himself would eventually pass off the scene, so he must commit the things learned to faithful men, who, in turn, would be adequately qualified to teach others. 2t2. 2 Thus the congregation would be built up as a bulwark against the apostasy to come, being a pillar and support of the truth. 1t3. 15. The Apostle Peter likewise, knowing that he and his fellow apostles would not be on hand much longer. 2p1. 14. Able to act as a restraint to the apostate movement instigated by the devil, counseled Christians to hold fast to their salvation through Christ, keeping their senses completely literally, being sober perfectly, setting their hope upon the undeserved kindness that was to be brought to them at the revelation of Jesus Christ. 1p1. 13 Knowing the seriousness of the times, with growing persecution from the world, they should be sound in mind, watchful, vigilant, and should not neglect serious prayer, to obtain the strength they would need for endurance. 1p4. 7 He warned them to keep their senses, because the devil was like a roaring lion seeking to devour, and they had to take a solid stand against the devil. This required soberness, seriousness, self-control. 1p5. 8, 9. Soko possibly, branch of a tree. 1. A Judean city in the Shephelah, seemingly referred to as both Soko and Soko. Jos 15. 20, 33, 35 The Philistines collected their armor together at Soko and then camped at nearby Ephes-Dammim before Goliath's encounter with David. 1-17. 1 years later this Soko was apparently among the cities that Obom strengthened. 2ch11. 5-7. However, this passage may apply to no. 2. Nevertheless, Soko, along with its dependent towns, was captured by the Philistines more than 200 years later, during King Ahaz's rule. 2ch28. 16-18 It is identified with the ruins at Bedabad Horvat Soko, in the low plain of Elah about 4 kilometers 2.5 miles of Azekah, although Kbutchuwaika, a short distance to the east, seems to preserve the biblical name. 2. Soko, a city in the mountainous region of Judah. Jos 15. 20, 48 It is often identified with the Kbutchuwaika, about 17 kilometers 11 miles of Hebron. This is a different Kbutchuwaika from the one mentioned in number 1. 3. Soko, a place under the administration of one of Solomon's deputies. 1 Kai 4. 7, 10 The suggested identification of it with Kbutchuwaika Duras, about 15 kilometers 9.5 MWNW of Samaria, seems to fit the account, since the proposed sites of both Arabath and Hepher mentioned with Soko in the king's account are nearby. 4. In the genealogy of Judah, Heber is called the father of Soko. 1ch4. 18 Soko could be a personal name of Heber's descendant, or the text could indicate that Heber was the founder of the city of Soko or its population. Assuming that this latter situation was the case, it is not possible to determine whether the reference is to Soko H number 1 or no. 2. Sodi Soti from a root meaning intimate group. A Zebulonite whose son no text to acute Miritra Longo, soldier 985 following year, Chedorlaomer and his allies defeated Bera, the king of Sodom, and his confederates. Besides seizing possessions and foodstuffs, the victors took Lot and others captive. GE 14. 1-12. Abraham's forces overtook Chedorlaomer and recovered the captives and booty, including Lot and his household. The king of Sodom insisted that Abraham keep the recovered material goods, but Abraham refused, lest Bera should say, "It was I who made Abram rich." GE 14. 13-24. Everlasting destruction. Sodom, however, persisted in a course in defiance of Jehovah, becoming known for such immoral practices as homosexuality. The cry of complaint about Sodom and Gomorrah, Jehovah declared, "Yes, it is loud, and their sin, yes, it is very heavy." God therefore sent his angels to destroy Sodom, with the assurance to Abraham that if 10 righteous persons could be found in the place, the whole city would be spared. GE 18. 16, 20-33. The city showed it deserved destruction, for a vile mob of residents of Sodom, including boys and old men, surrounded Lot's house, attempting to rape his angelic guests. The next day, after Lot, along with his wife and 2 daughters, left the city, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by sulfur and fire. GE 19. 1-29. Lu 17. 28, 29. Thereafter Sodom and Gomorrah became a proverbial figure of utter destruction from God Almighty to 29. 23. Issa 1. 9. 13. 19. Jah 49. 18. 50. 40. Ba 4. 6. Am 4. 11. Zep 2. 9. Row 9. 29. And of extreme wickedness. Likeness, in his image. GE 5. 3 at Psalm 139. 13-16. The embryonic growth of a child in the womb is spoken of, its parts being written down in Jehovah's book before any of them actually existed. Job 26. 7 describes Jehovah as hanging the earth upon nothing. Scientists today attribute the Earth's position in space primarily to the interaction of the law of gravity and the law of centrifugal force. Law to Adam. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were commanded by God concerning their duties: 1 to fill the earth, 2 to subdue it, and 3 to have in subjection all other living creatures of earth, sea, and air. GE 1. 28. They were given laws as to their diet, granting them the seed-bearing vegetation and fruit as food. GE 1. 29. 2. 16. However, Adam was given a command that prohibited eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. GE 2. 17. This command was transmitted to Eve. GE 3. 2. 3. Adam is referred to as a transgressor and a trespasser because he violated a stated law. Row 5. 14, 17. 4. 15. Laws to Noah. Patriarchal law. Noah was given commandments relative to the building of the ark and the saving of his family. GE 6. 22. After the flood he was given laws that allowed the adding of flesh to man's diet. Declared the sacredness of life and therefore of blood, in which is the life. Prohibited the eating of blood. Condemned murder. And instituted capital punishments for this crime. GE 9. 3-6. The patriarch was a family head and ruler. Jehovah is designated as the great family head, or patriarch, the father, to whom every family in heaven and on earth owes its name. F3. 14, 15. Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are outstanding examples of patriarchs. These were especially dealt with by Jehovah. Abraham was given the command to circumcise all the males of his household as a sign of God's covenant with him. GE 17. 11, 12. He observed Jehovah's commands, statutes, and laws. He knew Jehovah's way to do righteousness and judgment, and he laid these commands on his household. GE 26. 4, 5. 18. 19. The laws that governed the patriarchs were also generally understood and partially reflected in the laws of the nations at that time, all of which nations sprang from the 3 sons of Noah, the patriarch. For example, the Pharaoh of Egypt knew that it was wrong to take another man's wife. GE 12. 14-20, as did the kings of the Philistines in the cases of Sarah and Rebekah. GE 20. 2-6. 26. 7-11. In the days of Moses, the Israelites were in slavery to Egypt. They had voluntarily gone into Egypt during Jacob's lifetime, but were enslaved after Jacob's son, the Prime Minister Joseph, had died. So, in effect, they were sold into slavery for nothing. Jehovah, in harmony with the patriarchal law of redemption and of the priority of the firstborn son, told Pharaoh, by the mouth of Moses and Aaron, Israel is my son, my firstborn. And I say to you, send my son away that he may serve me. But should you refuse to send him away, here I am killing your son, your firstborn. X 4. 22, 23. No redemption price was necessary for this release, nor was any given to Egypt. And when our text to acute miritra longo, Law 213. GE 48. 22. 1 ch 5. 1. The oldest son normally became the patriarchal head when the father died. Sons, after marriage, could establish households separate from the father's headship and could themselves become family heads. Morals. Fornication was disgraceful and punishable, especially in cases of engaged persons or married persons' adultery. GE 38. 24-26. 34. 7. Brother-in-law marriage was practiced when a man died without a son. His brother then had the responsibility to take the widow as his wife, and the firstborn of their union would inherit the dead man's estate and carry on his name. De 25. 5, 6. GE 38. 6-26. Property. Generally there seems to have been no holding of individual property, aside from a few personal belongings. All herds, household goods, and equipment were held in common by the family. GE 31. 14-16. On the basis of related historical evidence, some scholars believe that, in transferring land, the buyer was shown the land from a vantage point, the exact boundaries being designated. When the buyer said, "I see," he indicated legal acceptance. When Jehovah gave Abraham the promise of receiving the land of Canaan, Abraham was first told to look in all four directions. Abraham did not say, "I see," perhaps because God said that he would give the promised land to Abraham's seed, later on. GE 13. 14, 15. Moses, as the legal representative of Israel, was told to see the land, which, if the view just discussed is correct, would indicate legal transfer of the land to Israel, for them to take it under Joshua's leadership. De 3. 27, 28. 5. Although Enoch's earlier prophesying may have been made known by preaching. Jude 14, 15. Noah's preaching righteousness prior to the flood evidently included a call for repentance and a warning of coming destruction, as is evidenced by Jesus' reference to the people's failing to take note. Mount 24. 38, 39. Noah's divinely authorized public proclamation, therefore, was not primarily a bringing of good news. Following the flood, many men, such as Abraham, served as prophets, speaking forth divine revelations. PS 105. 9, 13-15. However, prior to the establishing of Israel in the Promised Land, regular or vocational preaching does not seem to have been done in a public way. The early patriarchs were under no instructions to act as heralds. During the period of the kingdom rule in Israel, prophets did act as public spokesmen proclaiming God's decrees, judgments, and summonses in public places. Isra 58. 1. J 26. 2. Jonah's proclamation to Nineveh fits well the thought conveyed by Keirig Middledotner, O text to acute miritra longo, preacher, preaching 672. The messenger bringing the news of Zion's release from its captive state and related it to the public preaching work of Christians. Row 10. 11-15. In the Christian Greek scriptures. Though active primarily in the wilderness regions, John the Baptist did the work of a preacher or public messenger, heralding the approach of the Messiah and God's kingdom to the Jews who came out to him and summoning them to repentance. Mount 3. 1-3, 11, 12. Mr. 1. 1-4. Luke 3. 7-9. At the same time John served as a prophet, a teacher with disciples, and an evangelizer. Luke 1. 76, 77. 3. 18. 11. 1. Joe 1. 35. He was a representative of God and his witness. Joe 1. 6, 7. Jesus did not remain in the wilderness region of Judea after his 40-day fast there, nor did he isolate himself as in a monastic life. He recognized that his divine commission called for a preaching work, and he carried it on publicly, in cities and villages, in the temple area, synagogues, marketplaces and streets, as well as in the countryside. Mr. 1. 39. 6. 56. Luke 8. 1. 13. 26. Joe 18. 20. Like John, he did more than preach. His teaching receives even greater emphasis than his preaching. Teaching Dasko differs from preaching in that the teacher does more than proclaim. He instructs, explains, shows things by argument, and offers proofs. The work of Jesus' disciples, both before and after his death, was thus to be a combination of preaching and teaching. Mount 4. 23. 11. 1. 28. 18-20. The theme of Jesus' preaching was, Repent, for the kingdom of the heavens has drawn near. Mount 4. 17. Like an official herald, he was alerting his listeners to his sovereign God's activity, to a time of opportunity and decision. Mr. 1. 14, 15. As foretold by Isaiah, not only did he bring good news and comfort for the meek, broken-hearted, and mourning ones, as well as proclaim release to captives, but he also declared a day of vengeance on the part of our God. Isa 61. 2. He boldly announced God's purposes, decrees, appointments, and judgments before rulers and people. Following Jesus' death. After his death, and particularly from Pentecost of 33 CE onward, Jesus' disciples carried on the preaching work, first among the Jews and eventually to all the nations. Anointed by Holy Spirit, they recognized and repeatedly informed their listeners that they were authorized heralds. Act 2. 14-18. 10. 40-42. 13. 47. 14. 3. Compare 10. 15. Even as Jesus had stressed that he was sent by God. 9. 48. Joe 5. 36, 37. 6. 38. 8. 18, 26, 42, who gave him a commandment as to what to tell and what to speak. Joe 12. 49. Therefore, when ordered to cease their preaching, the disciples' reply was, Whether it is righteous in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, judge for yourselves. But as for us, we cannot stop speaking about the things we have seen and heard. We must obey God as ruler rather than men. Act 4. 19, 20. 5. 29, 32, 42. This preaching activity was an essential part of their worship, a means of praising God, a requisite to the gaining of salvation. Row 10. 9, 10. 1 Co 9. 16. Heb 13. 15. Compare Lu 12. 8. As such, it was to be shared in by all disciples, men and women, down till the conclusion of the system of things. Mount 28. 18-20. Lu 24. 46-49. Act 2. Lu 18. 6-17. A high priest was prohibited from marrying a widow, a divorced or violated woman, or a prostitute. He was to marry only a virgin from his people. Lu 21. 10, 13, 14. The other priests could not marry a prostitute or violated woman, nor a woman divorced from her husband. Lu 21. 1, 7. According to Ezekiel 44. 22. They could marry a virgin of the house of Israel or a widow who happened to be the widow of a priest. If a daughter inherited property, she was not to marry out of her tribe. This prevented a hereditary possession from circulating from tribe to tribe. New 36. 8, 9. Divorce. At the institution of marriage by the Creator, he made no provision for divorce. A man was to stick to his wife, and they must become one flesh. Ge 2. 24. A man would therefore have one wife who was considered one flesh with him. It was only after man's fall and consequent imperfections and degradation that divorce entered in. In giving the law to Israel, God did not at that time choose to enforce the original standard, but he regulated divorce so that it would not bring dissolution of the family arrangement in Israel or work undue hardship. However, at God's due time his original standard was restored. Jesus stated the principle governing the Christian congregation, that fornication gr. Poor middle. Naya is the only valid ground for divorce. He explained that God did not enforce this standard through Moses out of regard for the hard-heartedness of the Israelites. Mount 19. 3-9. Mr. 10. 1-11. In the Christian congregation, therefore, aside from death, which automatically breaks the marriage tie, the only other way it may be broken is on the ground of fornication, which causes the offending one to become one flesh with an illicit partner. It therefore o textui acute miritra longo, marriage 343 be a virgin at the time of their marriage. De 22. 13-19, 28, 29. After a divorce, if a woman married another man and this man later divorced her or died, the original husband could not marry her again. This worked to prevent any scheme to bring about a divorce from the second husband, or perhaps even his death, so the original couple might remarry. De 24. 1-4. Jehovah hated an unjust divorce, especially where a faithful worshipper of his was treacherously dealt with in order to arrange for another marriage to a pagan woman who was not a member of his chosen covenant people. Mount 2. 14-16. See divorce. Polygamy. Since God's original standard for mankind was for the husband and wife to become one flesh, polygamy was not intended, and it is prohibited in the Christian congregation. Overseers and ministerial servants, who are to set the example for the congregation, are to be men having not more than one living wife. 1 T 3. 2, 12. T 1. 5, 6. This is in harmony with what true marriage is used to picture, namely, the relationship of Jesus Christ and his congregation, the only wife possessed by Jesus. F5. 21-33. As was the case with divorce, polygamy, while not God's original arrangement, was tolerated until the time of the Christian congregation. Polygamy had a start not long after Adam's deflection. The first Bible mention of it is concerning a descendant of Cain, Lamech, of whom it says, he proceeded to take 2 wives for himself. Ge 4. 19. Concerning some of the angels, the Bible mentions that before the flood, the sons of the true God went taking wives for themselves, namely, all whom they chose. Ge 6. 2. Concubinage was practiced under patriarchal law and under the law covenant. A concubine had a legal status. Her position was not a matter of fornication or adultery. Under the law, if a man's firstborn son was the son of his concubine, this son would be the one to receive the firstborn's inheritance. When attacking the city of Ai, the Israelites sent out a small force that was defeated. This had a demoralizing effect on the Israelites, for the account says that the hearts of the people of Israel began to melt and became as water, meaning that they sensed they had somehow incurred Jehovah's displeasure and were without his help. Joshua was very upset, evidently because Israel, the army of Jehovah, had fled in fear before their enemies, thus bringing reproach upon Jehovah's name. Joe 7. 5-9. Watergate. Seagate, gateway. Watermelon heb. Avat middle.take. A large oblong or roundish fruit with a hard rind, many seeds, and a sweet pulp having high water content. It was one of the items of diet for which the mixed crowd and the Israelites expressed a longing while in the wilderness after leaving Egypt. U11. 4, 5 Watermelons Citrullus vulgaris have long been cultivated in Egypt and other parts of the Middle East. Wave offering. See offerings. War. The 6th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. In pronunciation, this letter corresponds generally to the English W, as in wine. At times, however, in modern Hebrew it is given the sound of English V. In this work it is transliterated as W, UW, and O+. Apart from its use as a prefix, it is rarely used as an initial letter, usually being substituted for by the letter Yod. In the Hebrew, it appears at the beginning of each of the 8 verses of Psalm 119. 41-48. Wax. Biblical references to wax are apparently to beeswax, a dark yellow substance that bees use in forming walls of honeycomb cells where they deposit honey or larvae. Wax is produced by worker bees, which, after consuming large amounts of honey, manufacture wax in special glands in their abdomens. The wax is excreted through tiny pores and forms as small white flakes on the exterior of the abdomen. The flakes of wax are then transferred to the bee's mouth, where they are chewed prior to construction use. The bee has control over the production of wax and makes it only when a supply is needed. CB. The wax is easily separated from the honey by melting it in warm water. This causes the wax to rise to the surface, where it can be skimmed off. The melting of wax is used in poetic scriptural illustrations to express a distressed condition of the heart. PS 22. 14. The dissolution of mountains and of plains. PS 97. 5. Mic 1. 4. And the destruction of God's enemies. The psalmist exclaimed, "As wax melts because of the fire, let the wicked ones perish from before God." PS 68. 1, 2. Way, the. This expression can be applied to a road, street, track, or path. A mode of action or conduct. Or a normal course, manner, or method. In the scriptures it is often used with reference to a course of conduct and action that is either approved or disapproved by Jehovah God. JG 2. 22. 2 Chi 21. 22. PS 27. 11. 32. 8. 86. 11. Is 30. 21. J 7. 23. 10. 23. 21. 8. With the coming of Jesus Christ, an individual's enjoying a proper relationship with God and approaching Him acceptably in prayer depended on acceptance of Jesus Christ. As the Son of God stated, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Job 14. 6. Heb 10. 19-22. Those who became followers of Jesus Christ were spoken of as belonging to the way, that is, they adhered to a way or manner of life that centered around faith in Jesus Christ, following His example. Act 9. 2. 19. 9, 23. 22. 4. 24. 22. Weaning. The process of training a nursing child to take food in another way. In ancient times, O textoi acute miritra longo, Weeds 1175 cates that Isaac was about 5 years old when weaned. See Isaac. A weaned child, though no longer yearning for nourishment from its mother, still finds security and satisfaction in her arms. Comparably, David had soothed and quieted his soul like a weanling upon his mother, and his soul was like a weanling upon him. Apparently it was soothed, quieted, and satisfied because he did not desire prominence, had manifested humility, avoided haughtiness, and refrained from walking in things too great for him. He urged Israel to act similarly, humbly waiting for Jehovah to time indefinite. PS 131. 1-3. Weapons. See arms, armor. Weaving. The process of interlacing sets of threads lengthwise and crosswise to make cloth. The group of threads running the length of the fabric is the warp, and the set running across it is the woof, or weft. Weft thread is woven alternately over and under the warp threads. La 13. 59. Weaving was often done by women, but was also apparently an occupation of man. 2 Chi 23. 7. 1 Ch 4. 21. The loom that the Hebrews, Egyptians, and others used for weaving was basically a frame. JG 16. 13. A strip along the coastline some 120 kilometers 75 mi long and up to 50 kilometers 30 mi wide. It was bounded by the province of Lycia on the W, the Roman province of Galatia on the N, and the kingdom of Antiochus on the E. On the coast the climate of Pamphylia was hot and tropical, while it moderated as one moved to the higher elevation of the Taurus Mountains. The inhabitants are thought to have been a mixture of a native tribe with Greeks, some even suggesting Pamphylia to mean of mingled tribes or races. Liddell and Scott's Greek English Lexicon, revised by H. Jones, Oxford, 1968, p. 1295. Evidently Jews or proselytes were in the area, for on Pentecost 33 CE persons from Pamphylia were in Jerusalem and were amazed to hear the disciples speaking in their own language. Act 2. 6, 10. A number of principal cities were on or near the coast, such as the seaport town of Italia, Perga on the Sestrislekshire River, and Side, where coastal pirates sold their booty and a slave market existed. From Paphos on Cyprus, Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark sailed NW across the sea and arrived at Perga in Pamphylia. It is not definitely known whether they landed at Italia and travelled on land the few miles to Perga or whether they sailed right to Perga. It is reported that in ancient times the Sestris was navigable at least as far as Perga. At this point John Mark separated from the others and returned to Jerusalem, but Paul and Barnabas went in through the mountains to Antioch in Pisidia in the province of Galatia. Act 13. 13, 14, 15, 38, 27. 5. That route was notorious for bandits. Compare to Co 11. 26. On the return trip the two Christians travelled through Pamphylia to Perga and preached there. Next they went to the port of Italia and sailed from there to Antioch in Syria. Act 14. 24-26. Pamphylia over the years was ruled by Lydia, Persia, Macedonia, and Rome. Under the Romans it was at various times united as a province with Cilicia to the east, then with Galatia, and finally with Lycia. Act 13. 13. 16. 6. 27. 5. Paper. In Bible times, a thin writing material made into sheets from strips obtained from the papyrus plant. See papyrus. The Egyptians are credited with being the first manufacturers of papyrus paper for writing purposes, using papyrus plants that then grew along the banks of the Nile River. Some archaeologists would place such paper production as far back as Abraham's time. Early Christians used papyrus paper for their letters, scrolls, and codices. It also played an important part in the production of Bible manuscripts, until it was replaced by vellum fine-grained animal skin in the 4th century CE. At 2 John 12, the apostle wrote that he would rather convey his message face-to-face than with paper and ink. Here the word paper translates the Greek word karties, which is said to mean a sheet of paper made of papyrus. Paphos. A city on the W coast of the island of Cyprus. Here Paul, after working his way across the island with Barnabas and John Mark, encountered the sorcerer Bar Jesus Elymas, who opposed their preaching o textoi acute miritra longo, Papyrus 574 Papyrus palmidal. Pyros heb. Gomi. A large aquatic plant belonging to the sedge family. It is a tapering three-sided stem, or stalk, that grows in shallow water to a height of 2 to 6 meters, 6.5 to 20 feet and terminates in a bush, or plume, of fine grass-like panicles. Picture, Volume 1, p. 544. The papyrus plant was used in the manufacture of various items, including a writing material. Papyrus cypress. Papyrus thrives in shallow, stagnant waters or marshes and along the banks of slow-moving rivers, such as the Lower Nile, where it once flourished but is now nearly extinct. Billnard asked Job, will a papyrus plant grow tall without a swampy place? Job 8. 11. Issa 35. 7. The plant's stems are buoyant, and to prevent the death of the infant Moses, his mother placed him in an ark of papyrus coated with bitumen and pitch and set him adrift on the Nile River. X2. 3 large vessels for traveling long distances were also made from papyrus. Issa 18. 2. These may have been made of bundles of papyrus stems lashed together. They had narrow ends, but the beams were broad enough to support standing passengers. In 1970, Thor Heyerdahl and a group of associates traveled across thousands of miles of the Atlantic in such a craft. Use as writing material. When the Egyptians prepared papyrus for writing material, they followed a rather simple process. In gathering the stems, they prized the thick pithy part that grew under the surface of the water because it yielded the broadest and whitest raw material. The outer rinds were peeled off, and the remaining pithy cores were cut into convenient lengths of 40 to 45 centimeters 16 to 18 inches. Next, the cellular pith was sliced into broad, but very thin, strips. The strips were then laid out vertically on a smooth surface and allowed to overlap slightly. Another layer of papyrus strips was placed horizontally over the vertical ones. Mallets were used to beat the layers until they were bonded into a unified sheet. Then after being dried in the sun, the sheets were trimmed to the desired size. Finally, they were smoothed and polished with pumice, shells, or ivory. This process produced a fairly durable, supple, near-white writing material. Gr. Scimital.pios. A small animal and arachnid, not included by biologists as among insects classified in the same group as spiders. But, unlike other arachnids, the female scorpion gives birth to living offspring instead of depositing eggs. The scorpion is equipped with 8 walking legs, a long, narrow, segmented tail terminating in a curved, poisonous stinger, and a pair of pincers resembling those of a lobster and studded with hypersensitive hairs. The tail is usually carried upward and curved forward over the creature's back and waves in all directions. The scorpion uses its stinger in defense and also to procure its prey. The victim is seized by the nippers and then, if necessary, stung to death. A nocturnal animal, the scorpion spends the day hidden under stones, in cracks and crevices of buildings, and even under mats and beds, coming out at night to feed on spiders and insects. Of the over 600 varieties of scorpions, generally ranging in size from less than 2.5 centimeters 1 inch to 20 centimeters 8 inches, about a dozen types have been encountered in Palestine and Syria. Although the scorpion's sting is usually not fatal to humans, there are several varieties with venom proportionately more potent than that of many dangerous desert vipers. The most poisonous of the kinds found in Israel is the yellow Larus quinquestritis. The great pain caused by a scorpion's sting is noted at Revelation 9. 3, 5, 10, where symbolic locusts are described as having the same authority as the scorpions of the earth and as having the capability of tormenting men just as a scorpion when it strikes a man. Scorpions were common in the wilderness of Judah and the Sinai Peninsula with its fear-inspiring wilderness. 8. 15. An ascent on the frontier of Judah, located at the southern end of the Dead Sea, was even called Akrabim, meaning scorpions. New 34. 4. Jos 15. 3. JG 1. 36. At 1 Kings 12. 11, 14 and 2 Chronicles 10. 11, 14, the Hebrew term akmiddle.rab-middle.bim, which is rendered scourges, literally means scorpions. The instrument of punishment alluded to may have been a scourge equipped with sharp points. In illustrating that his heavenly Father would give Holy Spirit to those asking him, Jesus Christ pointed out that a human father would not hand his son a scorpion if he requested an egg. Luke 11. 12, 13 To the 70 disciples he sent out, Jesus gave authority over injurious things, represented by serpents and scorpions. Luke 10. 19. Compare is 2. 6. Scourge. Sea beating. Plague. Scribe. A secretary or a copyist of the scriptures. Later, a person educated in the law. The Hebrew word somiddle.fa, which comes from a root meaning count, is translated secretary, scribe, copyist. And the Greek word gram-middle.matos is rendered scribe and public instructor. The term implies one who has learning. The tribe of Zebulun had those who possessed the equipment of a scribe for numbering and enrolling troops. JG 5. 14. Compare to Car 25. 19. 2ch 26. 11. There were scribes, or secretaries, in connection with the temple. 2ch 34. 9. 13 King Jehoshaphat's secretary worked together with the high priest in counting money contributed and then gave it to those paying wages to the workers repairing the temple. 2 Kai 12. 10-12 Baruch wrote at the prophet O textoi acute miritra longo, scribe 877 The Hebrew scribes acted as public notaries, prepared bills of divorce, and recorded other transactions. At least in later times they had no fixed fee, so one could bargain with them beforehand. Usually one of the parties to a transaction paid the fee, but sometimes both shared. Ezekiel, in his vision, saw a man with a recorder's inkhorn doing a marking work. As 9. 3, 4. Scripture copyists. It was in the days of Ezra the priest that the scribes Somiddle.Pherim, Sephirim first began to come into prominence as a distinct group. They were copyists of the Hebrew scriptures, very careful in their work and regarding mistakes with terror. As time went on they became extremely meticulous, going so far as to count not only the words copied but the letters also. Until centuries after Christ was on earth, the written Hebrew consisted only of consonants, and the omission or addition of a single letter often would have changed one word into another. If they detected the slightest error, the miswriting of a single letter, that entire section of the roll was rejected as unfit for synagogue use. Thereupon that section was cut out and replaced by a new and faultless one. They read aloud each word before writing. To write even a single word from memory was regarded as gross sin. Absurdities of practice crept in. It is said that the religious scribes prayerfully wiped their pen before writing the word Him God or Adho Sovereign Lord. But, despite this extreme care to avoid inadvertent errors, in process of time the Sephirim began to take liberties in making textual changes. In 134 passages the Sephirim changed the primitive Hebrew text to read Adho Na instead of I. In other passages Him was the word used as a substitute. Many of the changes were made by the Sephirim because of superstition in connection with the divine name and to avoid anthropomorphisms, that is, attributing human attributes to God. See Jehovah's superstition hides the name. The Masorets, the name by which copyists came to be known centuries into people of other nations, if they had to be taken by warfare, the virgin women and the children were saved. The 20. 10-15 All spoil in the form of goods or other items had to be cleansed. If of fabric, skin, or wood, it was to be washed. If metal, it was to be processed with fire. New 31. 20-23. Apostate cities. Israelite cities that turned apostate were to be completely annihilated with all their inhabitants, the spoil was to be burned in the public square, and the city was to be left a heap of ruins to time indefinite. The 13. 12-17. Christ despoils Satan's house. When on earth, Jesus Christ despoiled or plundered the house of Satan by delivering those held in bondage to the demons, curing the afflictions the demons had brought upon them. Mount 12. 22-29 Also, when he ascended on high he carried away captives. He gave gifts in men. These he took away from Satan's control as gifts for the building up of his congregation. F4. 8, 11, 12. False religious spoilers. Christ declared the scribes and Pharisees to be, like robbers, full of plunder, evidently acquired by extortion from widows and other defenseless persons. And also because they kept the people in religious bondage by taking away the key of knowledge. Mount 23. 25. Lu 11. 52 The religious leaders of the Jews were likewise prominent in causing the plundering of the possessions of Christians. Heb 10. 34. Sponge. The absorbent, tough, elastic skeleton of certain aquatic animals found in abundance in the waters of the eastern Mediterranean Sea and elsewhere. Sponges were probably obtained in the past as today by divers who removed them by hand from underwater rocks. After the living animal died and decayed within its skeleton, the sponge was washed thoroughly until only the skeleton remained. The sponge's ability to absorb and release liquids made it commercially important in ancient times. While Jesus Christ was on the torture stake he was offered some sour wine contained in a sponge that was at the end of a reed. Mount 27. 48. Mr. 15. 36. Joe 19. 29. Spring. Sea fountain, spring. Sprout. Sea branch, sprout. Starkish station she's head of grain. One in the Christian congregation at Rome in about 56 CE, whom Paul speaks of as my beloved, and to whom he sends his greetings. Row 16. 9. Stacked. Stacked drops Heb. Na middle.af were one of the ingredients of the incense limited to sacred use. X30. 34 The related verb form means drip. JG 5. For the Greek Septuagint rendered this word station middle.kte, meaning oil of myrrh, from the Greek verb stationzo, drip. Thus the Hebrew and Greek terms indicate that it was a balsam that drips from resinous trees. The Latin Vulgate rendered the word stacked. The specific tree yielding stacked is uncertain. Among the sources that have been suggested are oriental sweet gum tree liquid Umber orientalis and the mastic pistacia bush Pistacia lentiscus. Staff. Secremender's staff. Rod, staff. Stagheb. I middle.lil. An adult male deer. The red deer Cervus